"She's nobody," the Duchess sneered. The Duke removed his ring and slid it on her finger. The black crape had barely come down from the windows when they began dismantling Mrs. Hartley's life. Eliza Blackwood stood in the corner of the bedchamber that had been hers for 3 years, folding her spare chemise with the careful precision of someone who had learned to make every possession count. The room was small servants' quarters, really, though Mrs. Hartley had always insisted on calling it the companion suite, as though the addition of a worn armchair and a window overlooking the mews transformed 4 walls and a narrow bed into something grand. She would miss that window. She would miss the way morning light fell across the floorboards in slanted gold, the distant sounds of the city waking, the small rituals of tea and toast, and Mrs. Hartley's gentle confusion about which day of the week it was. She would not miss the way Lady Ashton looked at her, as though Eliza were something unpleasant discovered on the bottom of a shoe. "You're still here, then?" Speak of the devil. Eliza did not turn around. She recognized that particular tone of aristocratic disdain, cultured vowels sharpened to a point. "Lady Ashton." Eliza tucked the chemise into her battered travelling case. "I will be gone within the hour, as we discussed." "See that you are. My husband's aunt may have tolerated your presence, but I find the idea of a stranger lingering in my house most disagreeable." "Your house?" Eliza pressed her lips together. Mrs. Hartley had lived in this townhouse for 43 years. She had raised her children here, buried her husband here, spent her final years here puttering among her memories while her mind grew soft and vague. And now it was Lady Ashton's house, and Mrs. Hartley's companion was nothing but a stranger to be swept out with the rest of the inconvenient dust. "I understand completely," Eliza said. "I shall trouble you no further." "See that you don't." Lady Ashton lingered in the doorway, her silk morning dress rustling with every shift of her weight. She was the sort of woman who never simply stood. She arranged herself, conscious always of how the light fell, how an observer might frame her. "I have written you a reference, as agreed. You'll find it on the hall table. I trust you will not presume upon our brief acquaintance in the future." "I would not dream of it." Something in Eliza's voice, some note of dryness perhaps, or the ghost of irony, made Lady Ashton's eyes narrow. But Eliza kept her face carefully blank, and after a moment the lady withdrew in a whisper of expensive fabric. Alone again, Eliza allowed herself one slow breath, then another. She had learned long ago that anger was a luxury she could not afford. Wounded pride even less so. A woman in her position survived by becoming water flowing around obstacles, filling whatever container was offered, leaving no mark upon the stone. She finished packing. It did not take long. 3 dresses, all serviceable wool or cotton in shades of grey and brown. 2 pairs of stockings, carefully darned. A shawl that had belonged to her mother before her mother's eyes grew too weak for the fine embroidery she loved. A small leather case containing her father's spectacles, his prayer book, and a lock of her baby brother's hair, the brother who had lived only 3 days, whose grave she had not seen in 5 years. And 1 book of poetry, its spine cracked from reading and rereading. Wordsworth, her father's favourite. "The world is too much with us," she murmured, tucking it carefully between the folds of her winter dress. "Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers." She had no powers left to waste, only the careful husbanding of what remained. The reference, as promised, waited on the hall table. Eliza picked it up without reading it. She knew what it would say. Something adequate and damning in its adequacy. Miss Blackwood performed her duties satisfactorily. She is honest and capable. She may be recommended for similar positions. No warmth, no praise. Nothing that might suggest Eliza was anything more than functional. Well, functional would have to do. The servants gathered in the kitchen to see her off. Not because Lady Ashton had permitted it, she was occupied with more important matters upstairs, but because they had spent 3 years sharing cramped quarters and cold mornings and the unspoken solidarity of those who served. "You'll write, won't you?" Martha, the downstairs maid, pressed a wrapped bundle into Eliza's hands. "There's bread and cheese enough for the journey, and a bit of ham Cook was going to throw out anyway." "She was not going to throw it out," Eliza said gently. "I saw her set it aside this morning." Martha's cheeks reddened. "Well, you'll need your strength. London's no place for a lady alone." A lady. How strange to be called that. Eliza was the daughter of a vicar, educated enough to serve as companion to the gently born, poor enough to be dismissed as a servant. She occupied the in-between spaces too refined for the servants' hall, too humble for the drawing-room. Not quite anything. Not quite anywhere. "Thank you, Martha. Thank all of you." Eliza looked around the kitchen, at the faces that had become familiar without ever becoming family. "I shall miss this house." She did not say, "I shall miss being seen. I shall miss the small kindnesses that made invisibility bearable. I shall miss the illusion that I belonged somewhere, even if only in the margins." She picked up her travelling case and walked out the kitchen door into the grey London morning. The lodging-house where Eliza's mother lived was not precisely disreputable, but neither was it the sort of place a lady would choose if choice were an option. Mrs. Blackwood had a room on the second floor, small but clean, with a window that faced a courtyard where a persistent weed had forced its way through the cobblestones and put forth tiny white flowers every spring. "Eliza, my darling." Her mother's voice was thin now, reedy with age and illness, but her smile remained unchanged, the same warm curve that had greeted Eliza every morning of her childhood. Come in. You look tired. Have you eaten?" Martha sent provisions." Eliza set down her case and crossed to kiss her mother's papery cheek. "How are you feeling today?" "Oh, well enough. Mrs. Blackwood waved a dismissive hand, though her colour was poor and her breath caught with every other word. "The important question is how you are feeling. I know you were fond of Mrs. Hartley. She was kind to me. She was lucky to have you." Her mother reached up to touch Eliza's face, the gesture so familiar it made Eliza's throat ache. "My beautiful girl, you deserve so much more than this." Eliza took her mother's hand and held it. The bones felt fragile beneath the skin, like a bird's wing. "I have everything I need, Mama." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was a comfortable lie, worn smooth by years of repetition, and neither of them had the energy to examine it too closely. They ate Martha's bread and cheese together, while Eliza described her plans such as they were. She would seek a new position. Lady Ashton's reference would open some doors, if not the best ones. There were always elderly ladies who needed companions, invalids who needed nursing, children who needed governessing. She was educated, experienced, and patient. Something would come. "You should marry," her mother said, as she always did. "A husband would provide security." "What husband would have me?" Eliza kept her voice light. "I've no dowry, no connections, and my best dress has been mended so many times it's more thread than fabric. I'm afraid I missed my chance at a brilliant match." "You are worth any 10 society misses with their silks and their fortunes." "That may be so, but the men who make matches do not count worth in kindness." Eliza squeezed her mother's hand. "Don't fret, Mamma. We've managed this long, haven't we? We'll manage a while longer." After her mother fell asleep, Eliza sat by the window and watched the courtyard darken. The little white flowers were barely visible now, pale ghosts against the grey stones. This was her life, she thought. This small room, this careful economy, this endless series of positions that were not quite servitude and not quite anything else. She would grow older in rooms like this, tending to ladies like Mrs. Hartley, watching the world from its edges. It should not have felt like grief. She had never expected anything different. But somewhere beneath her resignation, so deep she barely acknowledged its existence, something small and stubborn refused to stop wanting. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived that changed everything. "Lady Ashton requires my presence," Eliza told her mother, frowning at the perfumed paper. "She says she has need of me for an afternoon engagement and wishes me to call at the townhouse at 11 o'clock. "Need of you?" Mrs. Blackwood looked skeptical. "That woman who couldn't wait to be rid of you." "Apparently so." Eliza turned the letter over, as though its back might reveal hidden meanings. "She says she will compensate me for my time." "And you're going to go?" "I'm going to go." Eliza refolded the letter with a sigh. "We need the money, Mama. And perhaps she means to recommend me for a position. Stranger things have happened." Stranger things had happened, but not, as it turned out, stranger than what Lady Ashton actually intended. "You want me to do what?" Eliza stood in Lady Ashton's dressing room, surrounded by an explosion of silks and satins, half-dressed maids darting to and fro, and the overpowering scent of rosewater. Lady Ashton sat at her vanity, having her hair pinned into an elaborate construction of curls and feathers. "I need someone to manage my accessories," Lady Ashton said, not bothering to look at Eliza's reflection. "My fan, my reticule, my vinaigrette if the afternoon grows tedious, and I need someone to remember the names of the lesser guests so that I might pretend to recognize them." "I am not a servant, Lady Ashton." "No? How interesting. I was given to understand you were precisely that." Lady Ashton's smile was thin. "The Dowager Duchess of Hartington is hosting a garden party this afternoon. It is the invitation of the season, and I intend to be remarked upon. For that, I require assistance. You are available and in need of funds." "I fail to see the difficulty." Eliza bit down on the inside of her cheek. The difficulty was dignity. The difficulty was pride. The difficulty was spending an afternoon being treated as furniture, while society ladies whispered behind their fans. But the difficulty was also rent, and medicine for her mother's cough, and the growing certainty that Lady Ashton's reference was not opening doors so much as closing them. "How much?" Eliza asked. Lady Ashton named a sum. It was not generous, but it would cover a month's lodging. "Very well," Eliza said, "but I will need appropriate attire. I cannot attend a duchess's garden party in this." She gestured to her grey wool dress, clean and pressed, but unmistakably shabby. "I had anticipated that." Lady Ashton waved a languid hand toward a corner of the room, where a gown lay draped over a chair. "You may borrow this. It is several seasons old and no longer suits me. You will return it afterward, of course." "Of course." Eliza crossed to examine the gown. It was grey silk, still grey, she noted with resignation, the colour of servants and half mourning, but finer than anything she had worn in years. The cut was simple, almost severe, designed to fade into the background. Designed, in other words, to make its wearer invisible. Eliza lifted the gown and held it against herself. In the mirror, she watched her reflection disappear into its colourless folds. Well, she had been invisible before. She would be invisible again. At least this time she would be paid for it. The Dowager Duchess of Hartington's garden party was, by any measure, a magnificent affair. Hartington Hall stood on the outskirts of London, close enough for convenience but distant enough for sweeping lawns and elaborate gardens that would have been impossible in the crowded city. Carriages lined the long drive, disgorging passengers in every shade of silk and muslin. Parasols bloomed like flowers against the afternoon sun. Laughter and conversation drifted across the manicured grounds. Eliza followed 3 steps behind Lady Ashton, carrying her fan and reticule, and trying to memorize the names of every guest they passed. Lady Jersey, Mrs. Drummond Burrell, the Countess of Sefton. Names from a world Eliza had only read about, attached to faces that looked through her as though she were made of glass. "Smile less," Lady Ashton hissed without turning around. "You look like you're enjoying yourself." Eliza arranged her features into careful blankness. She was not enjoying herself. She was cataloguing details, the architecture of the hall, the varieties of roses in the garden, the way the quality arranged themselves in elaborate patterns of precedence and snobbery, as though she might be quizzed on them later. It was a habit from her years of reading. Observe everything, record everything, build a library of experience in her mind against the poverty of her actual life. The Dowager Duchess herself held court near a marble fountain, surrounded by fluttering attendants. She was perhaps 50, handsome rather than beautiful, with sharp eyes and the kind of rigid posture that spoke of whalebone corsets and iron will. Her gown was lavender silk, unsubtly expensive, and she wore enough diamonds to ransom a small country. Lady Ashton. The Dowager's smile did not reach her eyes. "How delightful that you could attend." "Your Grace, the delight is entirely mine." Lady Ashton dipped into a curtsy so deep it was almost satirical. "What a magnificent gathering! I was just saying to my husband that your parties are always the most elegant of the season." "Were you indeed?" The Dowager's gaze drifted over Lady Ashton's shoulder, noted Eliza's grey-clad presence, and dismissed it without interest. "Do enjoy the refreshments. The lemonade is particularly fine." They were dismissed. Lady Ashton's smile tightened, but she curtsied again and retreated with what grace she could muster. "Insufferable woman," she muttered as soon as they were out of earshot. "She looked at me as though I were trade." Eliza said nothing. She had observed in her years of service that people who complained about being looked down upon were often the first to look down on others. Lady Ashton was no exception. "I need my fan. No, not that one, the ivory one. And find me a glass of champagne lemonade, indeed, as though I were a schoolgirl." Lady Ashton fluttered impatiently. "And then make yourself scarce until I require you. I cannot have you hovering about while I'm trying to make connections." "Of course, Lady Ashton." Eliza retrieved the correct fan, located a servant bearing champagne, and delivered both to her temporary mistress. Then she did as instructed, and made herself scarce, which meant finding a quiet corner of the garden where she could stand without being noticed, observe without being seen. It was a skill she had perfected over years, the art of invisibility. The rose garden proved ideal. Tucked behind a yew hedge, it offered a stone bench, a riot of red and pink blooms, and a view of the main party without being visible from it. Eliza settled onto the bench, arranged her skirts, and allowed herself a moment of simple pleasure. The roses were glorious. She had always loved flowers. Her father's vicarage had boasted a small garden, lovingly tended, full of hollyhocks and lavender, and the roses her mother had planted the year they were married. These were finer specimens by far, bred for perfection, but they stirred the same memories. She was contemplating a particularly magnificent crimson bloom when she heard the crying. It was a soft sound, muffled, as though someone were trying very hard not to be heard. Eliza rose from her bench and followed the sound around a corner of the hedge. A girl sat in the grass, knees drawn up, face buried in her arms. She was perhaps 12, all awkward angles and 2 sharp elbows, her pale hair coming loose from its pins. Her dress was white muslin, trimmed with pink ribbons, clearly expensive, but she wore it without grace, like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. "Hello," Eliza said gently. The girl's head jerked up. Her face was blotched with tears, her pale eyes red-rimmed. "Go away." "I could do that." Eliza remained where she was. "Or I could sit here and enjoy the roses while you compose yourself." I promise not to intrude upon your distress. I merely find this corner of the garden rather peaceful." The girl stared at her with suspicion. "You're not going to ask me what's wrong? Would you like me to?" "No." "Then I won't." Eliza settled back onto the bench, turning her attention to the roses as though the crying girl did not exist. After a moment, she heard the rustle of fabric as the girl shifted position. Then, grudgingly, "Why aren't you at the party with everyone else?" "I was instructed to make myself scarce." Eliza smiled faintly. "It seems we are both seeking refuge." Another silence. The girl sniffled. "My mother says I'm a disgrace." "Ah." Eliza still did not look at her. "And are you?" "I spilled lemonade on Lady Jersey's dress. It was an accident, but Mamma said—" The girl's voice broke. "She said I embarrass her. She said I'm plain and clumsy and no one will ever want to marry me." Eliza did turn then. The girl's face was a map of misery, the kind of bone-deep shame that came from believing oneself fundamentally flawed. "May I sit beside you?" Eliza asked. The girl hesitated, then nodded. Eliza lowered herself to the grass, heedless of the borrowed silk. Up close, she could see that the girl's plainness was largely a matter of presentation: hair too severe, dress too fussy, posture crumpled with self-consciousness. Her features were regular, her eyes an unusual shade of grey, her chin determined beneath its wobble. "I am going to tell you something," Eliza said, "and I would like you to listen very carefully. Will you do that?" The girl nodded again. "There are worse things than being considered plain." Eliza spoke quietly, as though sharing a secret. "There are worse things than spilling lemonade on a lady's dress, or being clumsy at a garden party, or failing to meet your mother's expectations. Do you know what they are?" "No." "Living your whole life afraid." Eliza let the words settle. "Becoming so terrified of judgment that you never speak your mind, never pursue your passions, never allow yourself to be seen. That is worse than any amount of clumsiness. That is worse than any amount of plainness." The girl's brow furrowed. "But Mamma says—" "Your mother is afraid too." Eliza softened her voice. "She is afraid for you, which comes out as frustration. She is afraid of what society will think, which comes out as criticism. It does not excuse her cruelty, but it may help you understand it. You talk very strangely." The girl wiped her nose on her sleeve, a gesture that would certainly horrify her mother. "Most people just tell me to try harder. Most people are afraid to tell the truth." Eliza smiled. "I have found that there are advantages to being nobody. I can say what I think without consequence, because no one is listening anyway. You're not nobody." "Am I not?" Eliza gestured at her grey dress, her borrowed finery. "I am a companion, or I was, until recently. I am the daughter of a country vicar. I have no fortune, no connections, no prospects. By society's measure, I am nobody at all." The girl studied her with new interest. "But you're not nothing. You're here, aren't you? You're talking to me. And you are the only person at this party who has truly seen me." Eliza reached out, very gently, and touched the girl's hand. "That is the secret, you know. The opinions of shallow people, the Lady Jerseys, and the gossips and the critics, they matter so much less than they seem. What matters is finding people who see you truly, who love you exactly as you are. What if there aren't any? There are always some. You simply haven't found them yet." The girl was quiet for a long moment. Then, very softly, "I'm Honoria, Lady Honoria Ashworth. Eliza Blackwood." Eliza squeezed her hand. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance, Lady Honoria." "Just Honoria." The girl managed a watery smile. "Since we're friends now."
Are we? You're the first person who's ever told me it's all right to be me. Honoria's chin lifted, a flash of the determination Eliza had sensed beneath the misery. That makes you my friend. Eliza felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerously close to hope. Then friends we are. Honoria! The voice cracked across the rose garden like a whip. Eliza and Honoria both jumped, turning to find a tall figure striding toward them through the hedge. He was not what Eliza expected. The man and he was very much a man, not a servant come to fetch. The wayward child moved with the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in impeccable dark coat and cream breeches. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples despite his apparent youth. His face was angular, almost harsh, a strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. But his eyes grey, the same unusual shade as Honoria's, were alive with worry. Honoria, thank God. He reached them and stopped, scanning the girl for injury or distress. I've been searching for you everywhere. Are you hurt? What happened? I'm fine, Sebastian. Honoria scrambled to her feet, swiping at her tear-stained cheeks. I just needed to get away for a moment. The man Sebastian finally noticed Eliza. His gaze swept over her, quick and assessing, noting her grey dress, her modest posture, her position on the grass beside his. Sister? They had the same eyes. And you are? Eliza rose, brushing grass from her borrowed silk with as much dignity as she could muster. Miss Blackwood, Your Grace. She knew who he was now. The grey eyes, the proprietary way he spoke to Honoria, the sheer force of his presence. This was Sebastian Ashworth, Duke of Hartington, the Dowager Duchess's stepson, the most eligible and most unapproachable bachelor in England, and she had just been sitting on the ground beside his sister, talking about the irrelevance of society's opinions. Miss Blackwood. His voice was cool, neither friendly nor hostile. You know my sister? We only just met. Eliza folded her hands, the picture of humble deference. Lady Honoria seemed distressed. I merely offered her company until she felt better. I apologize if I overstepped. She didn't overstep. Honoria moved to stand beside Eliza, a small gesture of alliance. She was kind to me. She told me the truth. The truth? The Duke's eyebrows rose. She said the opinions of shallow people don't matter as much as they seem. Honoria lifted her chin. She said what matters is finding people who see me truly. Something flickered in the Duke's grey eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. He looked at Eliza with new attention, really looked, and she felt the weight of his regard like a physical touch. That is unusually sage advice, he said slowly, for a garden party. I am an unusual sort of person, Your Grace. The words slipped out before Eliza could stop them. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I apologize. I should not have... No. He raised a hand, silencing her. Do not apologize. My sister has been surrounded by flatterers and critics her whole life. It appears she finally found someone willing to tell her the truth. Anyone would have done the same, Your Grace. Would they? His gaze held hers, and Eliza found she could not look away. There was something searching in his expression, something almost hungry. I find that anyone rarely does. People tell my sister she is awkward because they wish to ingratiate themselves with her mother. They tell her she is charming because they wish to ingratiate themselves with me. Truth is a rare commodity in my experience, Miss Blackwood. Eliza did not know how to respond to that. She was acutely aware of the borrowed dress, the grass stains on her hem, the fact that she was nobody standing before a duke and being seen, truly seen for the first time in longer than she could remember. I should return to Lady Ashton, she said finally. She will be wondering where I am. Lady Ashton? A slight frown. George Ashton's wife? I was companion to Mr. Ashton's aunt, Mrs. Hartley. Lady Ashton was kind enough to bring me today. The lie was bitter on her tongue. I should not keep her waiting. She curtsied, the formal gesture feeling strange after the intimacy of their conversation. When she rose, the Duke was still watching her. "Thank you, Miss Blackwood," he said. "For my sister." "It was my pleasure, Your Grace." She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back, feeling Honoria's small wave of farewell, feeling strangely as though she were leaving something important behind. The rest of the garden party passed in a blur. Eliza retrieved Lady Ashton's fan, fetched fresh champagne, recorded names and faces and scraps of gossip. She was invisible again, a grey ghost moving through the edges of the glittering crowd, and she told herself that was where she belonged. But she could not quite forget the way the Duke had looked at her, the weight of his attention, the flicker of something in his grey eyes. "Anyone rarely does," he had said, as though her simple kindness to his sister had been something remarkable, as though truth were a gift he seldom received. What must it be like, she wondered, to be so surrounded by flattery and deception that honesty became precious? To be so elevated that no one dared speak plainly? It must be lonely, she thought, terribly lonely. And then she caught herself feeling sorry for a duke, a man with wealth and power and every advantage the world could offer, and she almost laughed at her own absurdity. What did a duke need with her sympathy? He had everything. She had nothing. Their paths had crossed for a moment, a brief intersection of vastly different worlds, and now they would diverge forever. Except, "There she is!" The Dowager Duchess's voice cut through the chatter, sharp with displeasure. "That woman in grey, the one lurking by the refreshment table." Eliza froze. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, revealing a tableau that made her stomach drop. The Dowager Duchess stood near the fountain, flanked by Lady Jersey and Mrs. Drummond Burrell, her diamonds flashing in the afternoon sun. Beside her stood Honoria, pale and frightened, clearly dragged from wherever she had been hiding, and striding toward them all, his face thunderous, came the Duke. "Your Grace," the Dowager Duchess called to her stepson, "I have just discovered that your sister was found in a most compromising situation, consorting with some servant in the rose garden, crying like a common housemaid. It is exactly the sort of behavior I have warned you about." She was not consorting. The Duke's voice was ice. She was being comforted. By a stranger? By a nobody? The Dowager turned her sharp gaze on Eliza. "You there! Who are you? Who gave you permission to approach my daughter?" Eliza's heart pounded. Around her, the cream of London society watched with avid interest, scenting blood. Lady Ashton, she noted distantly, had gone pale and was edging away as though to distance herself from the coming disaster. "I asked who you are." The Dowager advanced, her silk skirts swishing. "Answer me, girl." "Her name is Miss Blackwood." The Duke stepped between them, his broad shoulders blocking Eliza from the Dowager's view. "And she owes you no explanation." "She owes me whatever I demand. This is my garden party, my home." "This is my home." The Duke's voice dropped, soft and deadly. "Never forget that, madam." The Dowager's face flushed with fury. "You dare speak to me so? After everything I have endured? You have endured nothing that you did not invite upon yourself." He turned slightly, his gaze finding Eliza behind him. "Miss Blackwood, you have my apologies for this display." Eliza opened her mouth to respond, to apologize, to excuse herself, to fade back into invisibility where she belonged. But before she could speak, Lady Ashton pushed forward. "Your Grace, I must explain this woman is in my employ, only for the day. She is no one of consequence. She's nobody."
She's nobody, the dowager echoed, seizing on the phrase with visible relief. A temporary servant, clearly overstepping her bounds. I shall have her removed at once. She's nobody. Lady Ashton nodded vigorously. Truly nobody at all. The Duke went very still. Eliza watched it happen, the shift in his expression, the tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something hot and reckless in his grey eyes. She had seen that look on men before, in the moment before they did something they could not take back. "Sebastian," she said softly, without thinking, using his Christian name as though she had the right.
"You don't have to." He turned to face her fully. The crowd fell silent. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. "Miss Blackwood," his voice carried across the garden, clear and deliberate, "would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" The world stopped. Eliza heard gasps, whispers, the dowager's outraged sputter. She saw Lady Ashton's jaw drop, saw Honoria's eyes go wide, saw the avid faces of society's most powerful women drinking in every detail for later dissection. She saw none of it. All she saw was the Duke Sebastian reaching for her hand. His fingers were warm and sure as they wrapped around hers, lifting her hand between them. "You." She could not find words. "Your Grace, you cannot." "I can." He held her gaze, and in his eyes she saw something that looked almost like pleading. "I am tired, Miss Blackwood."
Tired of sycophants and liars and people who tell me what they think I wish to hear. You told my sister the truth. You showed her kindness when no one else bothered. That is worth more to me than fortune or connection. But I am nobody. His smile was sharp, almost fierce. I think not. He released her hand, but only for a moment. She watched, frozen, as he reached up and touched the ring on his own hand, a heavy signet, gold and onyx, clearly old and clearly precious. He worked it free from his finger. "This ring belonged to my father," he said, still holding her gaze. "He gave it to me when I was 22 years old, the day I became Duke, and he told me to give it to the woman I chose to spend my life with. Not the woman society chose, not the woman my stepmother approved, the woman I chose." The ring glinted in the sunlight. Around them, the garden had gone utterly silent. "I choose you, Miss Blackwood." He took her hand again, turned it palm up. "If you will have me." Eliza could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stare at the ring in his fingers, the ring that represented everything she had never dared to want. She should refuse. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to refuse. This was madness. This was scandal. This was a duke acting on impulse, making a decision he would regret by morning. But he was looking at her, truly looking, seeing her, and she had spent so long being invisible. "Yes," she heard herself whisper. Sebastian Ashworth, Duke of Hartington, slid his ring onto her finger. It was too large, made for a man's hand, not hers, but it was warm from his skin and heavy with the weight of centuries. "No!" The dowager's shriek shattered the spell. "I forbid this. I absolutely forbid." "You forbid nothing." The Duke did not look away from Eliza's face. "I am the head of this family. My decisions are my own." Finally, he turned to the crowd, his arm sliding around Eliza's waist in a gesture of unmistakable possession. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Miss Eliza Blackwood, my future wife, the next Duchess of Hartington." Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. Others followed, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Whatever they truly thought, and Eliza had no illusions about what they truly thought, society knew how to recognize power. The Duke of Hartington had made his choice. They would follow his lead, or they would make an enemy of the most powerful man in England.
Through the thunder of applause, Eliza felt the Duke's arm tighten around her waist. She looked up at him and found his grey eyes waiting. "Well, Miss Blackwood," he murmured, for her ears alone, "it seems we have created quite the scandal." "It seems we have," she managed. "Your Grace, I don't understand. Why would you—" "Sebastian." His smile softened. "If we are to be married, you should call me Sebastian." Sebastian. The name felt strange on her tongue. "Why?" He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough with something that sounded almost like honesty. "Because you were kind to my sister. Because you told the truth. Because when you looked at me, you saw a man, not a title." He shook his head slightly. "I have spent 9 years surrounded by people who want something from me. You wanted nothing. That is rare." "I am nobody," Eliza said. "Everybody keeps saying so. Everybody is wrong." His hand covered hers, the one wearing his ring. "You are not nobody, Miss Blackwood. You are exactly what I have been looking for." Eliza looked down at their joined hands, at the ring that glinted gold against her skin. She thought of her mother in her cramped lodging-house, her future of endless grey servitude, the cage of low expectations she had built around herself so carefully. She thought of hope, that stubborn, dangerous thing she had tried so hard to kill, and she felt her fingers close around the ring, holding it tight against her palm. She did not want to give it back. God help her, she did not want to give it back. The carriage ride to Hartington Hall passed in silence. Eliza sat across from the Duke Sebastian, she reminded herself, though the name still felt foreign on her tongue, and tried to make sense of the last hour. The garden party had dissolved into chaos after his announcement. The Dowager had retreated in visible fury. Lady Ashton had disappeared entirely, and Honoria had thrown herself into Eliza's arms with a force that nearly knocked them both to the ground. "You're going to be my sister," the girl had whispered, fierce and joyful. "My real sister." Now Honoria dozed against Sebastian's shoulder, exhausted by the day's emotional upheaval, while the English countryside rolled past the carriage windows in a blur of green and gold. The afternoon sun slanted through the glass, catching the ring on Eliza's finger and throwing small sparks of light across the velvet seats. She should say something. She should ask questions, demand explanations, insist on understanding what had just happened to her life. But every time she opened her mouth, the words died in her throat. What does one say to a duke who has just upended everything? "You're very quiet." Sebastian's voice was low, careful not to wake his sister. "I imagine you have questions." "I have nothing but questions, Your Grace." "Sebastian. Sebastian." She folded her hands in her lap, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the ring. "I confess I do not know where to begin." "Begin with whatever troubles you most." Eliza considered this. There were so many things that troubled her, the suddenness of it all, the impossibility, the whispers that would follow her for the rest of her life. But one question rose above the others, demanding an answer. "Why me?" She met his eyes, grey to grey in the carriage's dim interior. "Truly, Sebastian, not the pretty speech you gave for society's benefit. Why would you bind yourself to a woman you met an hour ago? A woman with nothing to offer?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his sleeping sister. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Do you know how Honoria spends most of her days?" "I do not." "Alone." The word fell like a stone. "My stepmother, the Dowager, considers her a disappointment. She wanted a beautiful daughter, a diamond who would make a brilliant match and reflect glory upon her mother. Instead, she got Honoria. Plain, bookish, awkward Honoria, who would rather read than dance,
and who trips over her own feet at parties.
She is 12, Eliza said softly. She will grow into herself. I know that. You know that. But my stepmother sees only what Honoria is not, and she makes certain Honoria knows it every day. Sebastian's jaw tightened. I have tried to shield her. I have hired governesses and companions, thinking they might provide the warmth her mother withholds. But they all leave. They cannot tolerate the dowager's interference, or they take her side to curry favor, or they simply do not care enough to fight for a lonely child. And you think I would be different? I know you would be different. He leaned forward, intensity burning in his eyes. I watched you, Miss Blackwood. In that garden, with Honoria crying in the grass, you did something no one else has ever done. You told her the truth. You told her she was worthy of love exactly as she is. Do you have any idea how long she has waited to hear those words? Eliza thought of her own childhood, her father's gentle encouragement, her mother's endless affection, the security of knowing she was loved even when money was scarce and the future uncertain. She had taken it for granted, she realized. She had not understood how rare such gifts were. I spoke from experience, she said quietly. My father taught me that worth has nothing to do with fortune or beauty. He was a country vicar with a patched coat and a leaking roof, and he was the finest man I have ever known. Then he taught you well. Sebastian sat back, his expression softening. I am not a romantic man, Miss Blackwood. I do not believe in love at first sight or destiny or any of the nonsense society ladies read in their novels. But I believe in recognizing value when I see it. And when I saw you with my sister, when I heard you speak to her with such kindness, I recognized something I have been searching for without knowing it. What? Someone who sees people, not titles, not fortunes, not advantages to be gained. People. He smiled, a faint curve of his lips that transformed his harsh features. My stepmother called you nobody, but I think you may be the first somebody I have met in a very long time. Eliza did not know how to respond. She felt exposed, laid bare by his words, uncertain whether to be flattered or frightened by the weight of his expectations. You barely know me, she said finally. I could be anyone. I could be a fortune hunter, a fraud. Could you? His eyebrow arched. A fortune hunter who sits in the grass in a borrowed dress, telling a crying child that she is loved? A fraud who speaks of her father's patched coat with such obvious affection? He shook his head. You are not skilled enough at deception, Miss Blackwood. Your face gives you away. I have been told I am too plain to be interesting. Whoever told you that was a fool. His voice was matter-of-fact, without flattery. You are not fashionable, I grant you. You do not have the polish of a society beauty, but there is something in your face, a warmth, an honesty that is far more compelling than mere prettiness. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. She was not accustomed to compliments, and she did not quite trust them. You are very kind, Your Grace. Sebastian, and I am not kind. He smiled again, that unexpected softening. I am practical. I have been avoiding marriage for 9 years because every woman presented to me seemed designed in a factory, beautiful, accomplished, empty. They wanted my title, my fortune, my consequence. None of them wanted me. And you believe I do? I believe you do not want anything from me. That is far more intriguing. The carriage hit a rut in the road, jostling them all. Honoria stirred against Sebastian's shoulder, murmured something unintelligible, and settled back into sleep. We will arrive at Hartington Hall within the hour, Sebastian said quietly. I should warn you it will not be comfortable. My stepmother will make your life as difficult as possible. The servants will take their cues from her until they learn otherwise. You will be entering hostile territory, Miss Blackwood. Eliza. She surprised herself with the correction. If we are to be married, you should call me Eliza." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. Eliza. A lovely name. It was my grandmother's. Then I shall endeavour to be worthy of it. He held her gaze. This will not be easy. I want you to understand that. I am offering you security, position, protection, but I am also offering you a battle. The Dowager will not accept you. Society will whisper behind your back. There will be days when you wonder why you ever agreed to this madness. And on those days, you will remember Honoria. He glanced down at his sleeping sister, and his expression softened with unmistakable love. You will remember that you are the first person to make her believe she is worthy of love. And perhaps that will be enough. Eliza looked at the girl's face, peaceful now in sleep, and felt something shift in her chest. She had spent years protecting herself from wanting things she could not have. She had built walls of low expectation, told herself that contentment was enough, learned to want nothing that might be denied. But here was a child who needed her. Here was a man who saw her. Here was a life that terrified her precisely because it offered so much more than she had ever dared to dream. "It will be enough," she said softly. "It will have to be." Hartington Hall rose from the landscape like a promise and a threat. Eliza had seen grand houses before from a distance, through carriage windows, in the pages of illustrated books. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of approaching one as its future mistress. The hall was enormous, a sprawling edifice of golden stone and countless windows, surrounded by gardens that seemed to stretch to the horizon. The drive alone took 10 minutes to traverse, lined with ancient oaks that formed a cathedral of green overhead. "It's beautiful," she breathed, before she could stop herself. "It is home." Sebastian's voice was neutral, but she caught something beneath the words, pride, perhaps, or the weight of responsibility. "My family has lived here for 300 years. I was born in the East Wing, in the same room where my father was born, and his father before him." "And Honoria?" "Honoria was born in London. My stepmother preferred the city." He did not elaborate, but his tone said everything. The carriage pulled to a stop before the main entrance, and Eliza felt her stomach tighten with nerves. Footmen in livery descended the steps to open the doors, their faces carefully blank. She caught the flicker of curiosity in their eyes. Word travelled fast in great houses, and surely they already knew what had happened at the garden party. Sebastian stepped down first, then turned to help Honoria, who had woken during the final approach and now clung to his hand with obvious anxiety. "It will be all right," he murmured to his sister. "I promise." Then he turned to Eliza and extended his hand. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, and for a moment she felt anchored, as though his touch could protect her from whatever lay ahead. "Welcome to Hartington Hall," he said, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Welcome home." The Dowager Duchess was waiting in the great hall. She stood before the massive fireplace like a general before battle, her spine rigid, her face carved from marble. 2 footmen flanked her, along with a severe woman in black, whom Eliza took to be the housekeeper. The atmosphere was glacial. "Sebastian," the Dowager's voice could have frozen wine, "I see you have brought your acquisition." "Eliza." Sebastian's hand tightened on hers. "Her name is Miss Blackwood, and she is my betrothed. You will address her with the respect her position demands." "Her position?" The Dowager's laugh was brittle. "What position is that precisely? She has no family, no fortune, no connections. She is a servant. She is the woman I have chosen to marry." Sebastian stepped forward, placing himself between Eliza and his stepmother. "I will not discuss this with you again. The announcement has been made."
The wedding will take place within the month. You may accept this gracefully, or you may make yourself disagreeable. The outcome will be the same either way." The dowager's eyes blazed. "You shame your father's memory." "Do not speak to me of my father." Sebastian's voice dropped, soft and deadly. "You did not know him as I did. You were his wife for 7 years, and in all that time, you never understood the first thing about what he valued. I gave him a daughter. You gave him a child you have spent 12 years trying to make into something she is not." Sebastian glanced at Honoria, who stood pale and silent by the stairs. "Honoria is everything my father would have wanted her to be. Kind, intelligent, honest. If you cannot see her worth, that is your failure, not hers." The dowager's face contorted with fury. For a moment, Eliza thought she might scream, or weep, or do something dramatic enough to match the Gothic proportions of the hall, but instead she drew herself up with icy dignity. "Very well, you have made your choice." Her gaze swept over Eliza, dismissive and contemptuous. "But do not expect me to play nursemaid to your little nobody. She will sink or swim on her own merits, and I suspect she will sink." She swept past them, her black skirts rustling, and disappeared up the grand staircase without another word. The housekeeper, Mrs. Phelps, Eliza would later learn, stepped forward with a curtsy so stiff it could have been carved from wood. "Your Grace, shall I show Miss Blackwood to her rooms?" "You shall." Sebastian's voice was clipped. "And Mrs. Phelps? Miss Blackwood is to be treated as the mistress of this house. Any servant who fails to accord her proper respect will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Good." He turned to Eliza, and his expression softened. "I apologize for the welcome. It will improve." "Will it?" "It will." He raised her hand to his lips, a gesture so unexpected that Eliza felt her breath catch. "I promise you that, Eliza. Whatever battles we must fight, we will fight them together." He released her hand and strode away, Honoria trailing behind him, leaving Eliza alone with the glacial housekeeper and the staring footman. "This way, miss," Mrs. Phelps said, her tone making clear that she did not approve of any of this. "Your rooms are in the east wing." Eliza followed, her borrowed grey silk rustling with every step, and wondered what on earth she had gotten herself into. The rooms were beautiful. Whatever hostility Mrs. Phelps harboured, she could not diminish the loveliness of the chambers Eliza had been given. A sitting room with tall windows overlooking the garden, a bedroom with a 4-poster bed hung in pale blue silk, a dressing room with more space than Eliza's mother's entire lodging house, and flowers everywhere. Flowers. Roses in crystal vases, their scent filling the air like a blessing. "His Grace ordered them brought up this morning," Mrs. Phelps said, following Eliza's gaze. "Before the garden party. He said he wished the rooms to be welcoming." "Before the garden party?" Eliza frowned. "But he could not have known—" She stopped. Sebastian could not have known he would propose to her. He had not known she existed until he found her in the rose garden with Honoria. "The rooms have been prepared for some time, Mrs. Brayton," Phelps said, her expression unreadable. "His Grace has been considering marriage for several months. He wished everything to be in readiness." Eliza looked around the rooms with new eyes. He had prepared this not for her specifically, but for whoever he eventually chose. He had thought about flowers and sunlight and comfort. He had tried to create a welcome even before he knew who would receive it. It was, she realized, rather touching. "Thank you, Mrs. Phelps." She kept her voice steady. "I appreciate your efficiency." "The Duke's orders, miss." But something flickered in the housekeeper's eyes, surprise perhaps at being thanked. "Dinner is at 8. His Grace suggests you rest before then. A maid will come to help you dress." "I do not need—" Eliza began, then stopped. She was to be a duchess. Duchesses did not dress themselves. "Thank you. That would be appreciated." Mrs. Phelps curtsied and withdrew, leaving Eliza alone in her magnificent rooms. She stood very still for a moment, trying to absorb it all. The silk bed hangings, the crystal vases, the view of gardens that stretched farther than she could see. This morning she had been packing her belongings in a servant's room, dreading her uncertain future. Now she stood in chambers fit for royalty, engaged to one of the most powerful men in England. She looked down at the ring on her finger, Sebastian's ring, his father's ring, and felt the weight of everything it represented. Then she walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cool glass, and allowed herself to cry. The maid who came to help her dress was young, perhaps 16, with freckles and nervous hands.
"I'm Annie, miss." She bobbed a curtsy. "Mrs. Phelps sent me." "Hello, Annie." Eliza managed a smile despite her swollen eyes. "I confess I don't have much for you to work with. This dress is borrowed and my own things are—" She trailed off. Her things were still at her mother's lodging house, a lifetime away from this golden palace. "His Grace sent to London, miss." Annie moved to the wardrobe and opened it, revealing rows of dresses in soft colours, rose and cream and pale green. "These arrived this afternoon. He said you were to have whatever you needed." Eliza stared at the dresses. There were dozens of them, morning gowns, afternoon gowns, evening gowns, wraps and spencers and pelisses. More clothes than she had owned in her entire life. "He sent for these this afternoon?" "He has accounts with the best modistes in London, miss. When the Duke of Hartington sends for something, people move quickly." Eliza touched the sleeve of a rose-pink evening gown, feeling the whisper of silk beneath her fingers. She had never worn anything so fine. She had never imagined she ever would. "I don't know what to choose," she admitted. Annie's nervous expression softened into something almost like warmth. "The rose, miss. It suits your colouring. And if I may say, you've nothing to fear. The servants may take their cues from Mrs. Phelps now, but that won't last. We can see when someone's quality, even if they come in through the servants' entrance." "I did not come in through the servants' entrance." "No, miss." Annie smiled. "That's what I mean." Dinner was a peculiar affair. The dining room could have seated 40, but tonight only 4 places were set, Sebastian at the head, the Dowager at the foot, Honoria and Eliza facing each other across an expanse of white linen and silver candlesticks. The Dowager did not acknowledge Eliza's presence. She spoke exclusively to Sebastian, discussing estate matters and social obligations as though their earlier confrontation had never occurred. When she mentioned the garden party, it was only to observe that Lady Jersey had seemed in poor spirits. "Perhaps because someone spilled lemonade on her dress," Sebastian said dryly. The Dowager stiffened, but did not respond. Eliza ate her soup in silence, acutely aware of every mistake she might be making. Was she holding her spoon correctly? Using the right glass? She had been taught proper manners as a vicar's daughter, and her years as a companion had refined them further. But this level of formality was beyond anything she had experienced. "Miss Blackwood," Sebastian's voice cut through her anxiety. "Tell me about your father. You mentioned he was a vicar." Eliza looked up, surprised. The Dowager made a small sound of disgust. "He was." Eliza set down her spoon. "In Hampshire. A small parish, nothing grand, but he loved it. He used to say that a vicar's true work was not in the pulpit, but in the homes of his flock. He knew every family, every joy and sorrow, every new baby and lost grandparent. He sounds like a good man. He was the best man I have ever known." Eliza heard the warmth in her own voice and did not try to suppress it. "He died 3 years ago, a fever that swept through the village. He caught it while visiting the sick and never recovered. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you."
She met Sebastian's eyes across the table. He would have found this situation highly amusing, I think. His daughter, engaged to a duke. He always said God had a sense of humour. Sebastian smiled a real smile, not the careful social expression she had seen at the garden party. I would have liked to meet him. He would have interrogated you mercilessly about your intentions and your reading habits. Eliza found herself smiling back. He believed you could tell everything about a man from the books he kept. And what books did he keep? Everything. Poetry, philosophy, natural history, sermons both ancient and modern. Our cottage was more library than home. My mother used to complain that she could not find a clear surface anywhere. Your mother, she is still living. In London. She is not well, but she manages. Eliza hesitated, remembering Sebastian's promise. I should write to her. She will have heard rumours by now, and I would rather she learned the truth from me. Write tonight. I will have it delivered first thing in the morning. Sebastian paused. And Eliza, I meant what I said. Your mother will be cared for, regardless of what happens between us. That is not conditional. The Dowager made another disgusted sound. How touching! The Duke of Hartington, playing benefactor to every stray that crosses his path. Mother, Honoria said sharply, don't. Everyone turned to look at the girl. She had been silent throughout dinner, picking at her food. But now her pale eyes blazed with something that looked remarkably like courage. Don't speak of Eliza that way. She's been kinder to me in one day than you have in my whole life. The Dowager's face went white. How dare you? Enough! Sebastian's voice cut through the rising tension. This dinner is concluded. Honoria, you may be excused. Eliza, I believe you wish to write to your mother. He rose, and the footman stepped forward to pull out chairs. Eliza stood, trembling slightly, aware that something significant had just occurred. Honoria slipped around the table and took Eliza's hand. Come on, she whispered. I'll show you the library. It's the best room in the house. Eliza let herself be led away, feeling the Dowager's furious gaze burning into her back. The library was, as promised, magnificent. 2 stories of books rose around them, accessible by a wrought-iron gallery and a spiralling staircase. Leather chairs clustered near the fireplace, and tall windows let in the last light of the setting sun. Papa loved this room, Honoria said softly. Sebastian does too. He comes here at night when he can't sleep. I've seen him, walking among the shelves, pulling down books and putting them back. You miss your father. I barely remember him. Honoria's voice was matter-of-fact, but Eliza heard the loss beneath it. He died when I was 5. Mamma tells me stories about him, but they're always about what he gave her jewels and gowns and her position as Duchess. She never talks about what he was like. What do you remember? Honoria was quiet for a moment. He smelled like tobacco and horses. He used to carry me on his shoulders and tell me I was his little queen. He laughed a lot at least. I think he did. Sometimes I'm not sure if I remember him or if I just remember wanting to remember him. Eliza squeezed her hand. That's a kind of remembering too. Sebastian says I have his eyes. Honoria looked up at her, and Eliza saw the resemblance, the same unusual grey, sharp and clear. He says that when he looks at me, he sees Papa looking back. That must be a great comfort to him. I think it hurts him, actually. Honoria bit her lip. He loved Papa so much. And then Papa married Mamma and everything changed. Sebastian pretends he doesn't mind, but I know he does. He's been taking care of me since I was born, protecting me from Mamma's disappointment, and I don't think anyone has ever taken care of him. Eliza thought of Sebastian's careful reserve, the walls she sensed behind his eyes. She thought of what he had said in the carriage, that he had spent 9 years surrounded by people who wanted something from him, that he had never met anyone who wanted him.
Perhaps, she said slowly, that is something we can change. Honoria's face lit up. Do you mean it? You'll stay? You won't let Mamma drive you away? I will stay. Eliza heard the conviction in her own voice and wondered when she had made this decision. Your brother made me a promise. I intend to make one in return. What promise? Eliza looked around the beautiful library, at the thousands of books waiting to be read, at the life waiting to be lived. She thought of her grey dresses and her low expectations, the cage she had built around herself to keep from wanting things she could not have. Perhaps it was time to want something. Perhaps it was time to let herself dream. I promise, she said, to try. The night brought unexpected tenderness. Eliza had written to her mother a long letter full of reassurances and explanations, and the hope that she might visit soon, and given it to Annie to be sent. She had changed into a nightgown of fine cotton, softer than anything she had ever worn, and brushed out her hair by candlelight. She could not sleep. The room was too quiet, too grand, too full of shadows and possibilities. She lay in the enormous bed and stared at the canopy overhead and thought of everything that had happened since morning. Finally, restless, she rose and wrapped herself in a shawl and slipped out into the corridor. The house was silent at this hour, but not dark candles burned in sconces along the walls, casting pools of golden light. Eliza moved quietly, not certain where she was going, letting instinct guide her feet. She found herself at the library. The door was ajar, and firelight flickered within. She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Honoria had said Sebastian came here at night when he couldn't sleep. Perhaps she should leave him to his solitude. But even as she thought it, his voice drifted through the gap. You might as well come in, Eliza. I can see your shadow. She pushed open the door. He stood by the fire, a glass of something amber in his hand, still dressed in the evening clothes he had worn at dinner. His coat was discarded, his cravat loosened, his dark hair slightly dishevelled. He looked younger like this, more human. Less like a duke and more like a man. I could not sleep, she said. I apologize for disturbing you. You are not disturbing me. He gestured to a chair by the fire. Sit, warm yourself. The house grows cold at night, even in summer. She sat, tucking her feet beneath her, and watched him pour a second glass from a decanter on the side table. Brandy, he said, handing it to her. For the nerves. I imagine you have had quite a day. That is an understatement. She took a sip and felt warmth spread through her chest. Your Grace. Sebastian. Sebastian. She met his eyes. What happens now? You've announced our engagement, but I don't understand what you actually want from me. A marriage of convenience, you said. Separate lives under the same roof. But tonight at dinner, you asked about my father. You smiled at my stories. I was curious. He sat in the chair across from her, the firelight playing across his features. Is that so strange? You are to be my wife. I wished to know something of who you are. But you don't actually want a wife. You want a shield, someone to deflect society's pressure, someone to be kind to your sister. Is that not enough? Eliza considered the question. 24 hours ago, it would have been more than enough. Security, position, the chance to help a child who needed her, she had never dared dream of such things. But sitting here in the firelight, watching his grey eyes reflect the flames, she found herself wanting more. I don't know, she said honestly. I have spent so long not wanting things, not hoping for things. You asked me today if I would have you, and I said yes without really understanding what that meant. Now I find myself wondering what kind of marriage is this to be? What kind of life? Sebastian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I do not know how to be a husband, Eliza. I watched my father's first marriage a love match, by all accounts, and it ended with my mother's death when I was 12. I watched his second marriage, and it was something else entirely. Duty, I suppose. Practicality. The dowager brought her own fortune and the promise of an heir. He never spoke of love with her. And you? What do you want? I want peace. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I want a home that is not a battlefield. I want my sister to grow up knowing she is valued. I want... He stopped, shaking his head. I want things I have no right to ask for. Not from a woman I have known for mere hours. What things? He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch, longing, carefully controlled but unmistakable. I want to be known, he said softly. Not the Duke, not the title, not the fortune. Me, Sebastian. The man who sits alone in libraries at night because the silence is easier than the pretense. The man who loves his sister more than he knows how to show. The man who has forgotten how to laugh, how to hope, how to want anything for himself. Eliza felt her heart turn over in her chest. That is not an unreasonable thing to want, she said. Is it not? I have spent 9 years being reasonable. I have done my duty, managed my estates, fulfilled my obligations. I have been everything a duke should be. And I am tired, Eliza. So desperately tired of being admired and never known. Then let me know you. The words hung between them, soft and dangerous. Sebastian's eyes widened slightly. You would do that? Even knowing what you are walking into, the hostility, the whispers, the battle with my stepmother. I told Honoria I would try. Eliza set down her glass and leaned forward. But I cannot do it alone. If this is to work, if we are to build something real from this madness, you must try too. You must let me in, not just into your house, but into your life. And if I cannot, if I have forgotten how, then we will learn together. She held out her hand, the ring glinting on her finger. I am not asking for love, Sebastian. I am not asking for passion or romance or any of the things society ladies dream of. I am asking for honesty. I am asking for partnership. I am asking for the chance to build something true. He looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. You are remarkable, he said quietly. I hope you know that. I am nobody. Everyone keeps saying so. Then everyone is blind. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gentle touch that sent warmth flooding through her. You are exactly what I needed, Eliza Blackwood. I am only beginning to understand how much. They sat like that for a time, hands joined, fire crackling, the great house silent around them. It was not love, not yet, not quite. But it was something, a beginning, a bridge. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza allowed herself to hope. The weeks that followed were a study in contrasts. By day, Eliza navigated the treacherous waters of Hartington Hall. The dowager's hostility showed no signs of diminishing. She criticized everything from Eliza's posture to her accent, found fault with her gowns and her manners and her very existence. The servants remained wary, caught between their mistress's displeasure and the Duke's explicit orders. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with small kindnesses. Eliza learned the names of every servant in the house, something the dowager had never bothered to do, and made a point of thanking them for their work. She visited the kitchens, something duchesses never did, and complimented cook on her pastries. She helped a housemaid carry linens when the girls' arms were full, and she spent an hour with the gardener discussing the proper care of roses. Word spread, as it always does. The lady was kind. The lady remembered names. The lady did not put on airs. Annie, Eliza's maid, became an unlikely ally.
She brought gossip from below stairs, who was sympathetic, who was not, which footman might be won over with praise for his silver polishing. She also brought reports on the dowager's movements, allowing Eliza to avoid confrontations whenever possible. "She's been writing letters," Annie reported one morning, helping Eliza into a pale green morning gown. "To London, to her friends. I heard Mrs. Phelps talking about it. She's trying to turn society against you before the wedding. Let her try." Eliza studied her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. The fine clothes, the carefully styled hair, the subtle flush of health that came from regular meals and adequate sleep. I cannot stop her from writing letters. I can only give society reason to doubt what she says. How will you do that? By being exactly what she claims I am not. Eliza smiled. Kind, gracious, grateful for the Duke's condescension. The more she paints me as a grasping fortune hunter, the more my behavior will give the lie to her words. It was a strategy born of necessity, but it was also genuine. Eliza had no taste for social warfare, no skill at manipulation or intrigue. Her only weapons were honesty and kindness, and she wielded them with increasing confidence. Honoria blossomed under her attention. The girl followed Eliza everywhere, peppering her with questions, sharing books and secrets and dreams. They walked in the gardens together, read poetry aloud in the library, practiced dancing in the music room, while Sebastian played the pianoforte with surprising skill. "I did not know you played," Eliza said, breathless from a waltz. "There are many things you do not know about me." But he was smiling as he said it. "My mother taught me. She said music was the language of the soul." "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. His fingers moved over the keys, picking out a melancholy tune. "She died when I was 12. A fever, like your father. One week she was reading to me by the fire, and the next—" He stopped playing. "I do not speak of her often. It is easier not to." Eliza crossed to the pianoforte and stood beside him. "Sometimes easier is not better." "No." He looked up at her, and in his grey eyes she saw the boy he had been lost, grieving, forced to grow up too fast. "No, it is not." She touched his shoulder, a brief contact, and felt him lean into her palm for just a moment. "Play something cheerful," she said. "Honoria wants to practice the cotillion." He played something cheerful, and if his eyes were brighter than usual, neither of them mentioned it. The first ball came 3 weeks after the engagement. Lady Salisbury was hosting a grand affair, and Sebastian insisted they attend. It would be their first public appearance as an engaged couple, and their behavior would set the tone for how society received Eliza. "The Dowager has been spreading rumors," Sebastian told her the night before, "that you trapped me into this engagement through some stratagem, that you seduced me, or blackmailed me, or ensnared me with feminine wiles." "Feminine wiles?" Eliza laughed despite herself. "I have never had a feminine wile in my life." "I am aware." His smile was dry. "That is precisely why the rumors are absurd. But society does not care about truth. It cares about entertainment. We must give them a different story." "What story?" "A love story." He took her hands in his. "Tomorrow night, I will look at you as though you are the only woman in the world. I will dance with you, speak with you, never leave your side. I will make it impossible for anyone to believe I was trapped into anything." Eliza's heart stuttered. "And I?" "You will be yourself." His thumbs brushed across her knuckles. "Kind, honest, warm. Everything the Dowager claims you are not. Let them see the woman I see, and they will understand why I chose you." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple." His eyes held hers. "I am not asking you to pretend anything. I am asking you to be Eliza Blackwood, and let that be enough." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could walk into a ballroom full of aristocrats and win them over with nothing but herself. But she had spent too many years invisible to trust that her mere presence could command attention. "What if it is not enough?" she whispered. "What if they look at me and see what the dowager sees, a nobody, a stray, a fortune hunter who does not belong? Then they are fools." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles one by one. "And I have never cared what fools think." The ballroom was a sea of silk and candlelight. Eliza stood at the top of the staircase, Sebastian's arm beneath her hand, and looked down at a world she had only ever observed from its margins. Hundreds of guests in their finest attire, the cream of London society, all turning to watch as they descended. She wore ivory silk, the finest gown Sebastian's modiste had produced. Her hair was dressed with pearls borrowed from the Hartington collection. Around her throat hung a simple gold locket, her mother's, the only jewellery she truly owned. "Breathe," Sebastian murmured, his lips near her ear. "They cannot harm you. You are with me. They are staring. Let them." His hand covered hers on his arm. "They are seeing their future Duchess. Let them look their fill." They descended together. Eliza kept her chin high, her shoulders straight, her face serene. Every lesson from her years as a companion came back to her: how to move through a room, how to acknowledge greetings, how to seem perfectly at ease when every nerve was screaming. Lady Salisbury met them at the bottom of the stairs. She was a formidable woman, widow of an earl, known for her sharp wit and sharper tongue. She would set the tone for how Eliza was received. "Your Grace," she curtsied to Sebastian, "and this must be Miss Blackwood. The entire ton is buzzing about your unusual courtship." "Lady Salisbury," Eliza curtsied deeply, "I am honoured to be here. Your home is magnificent." "It is, isn't it?" Lady Salisbury's eyes swept over her, assessing. "I knew your father, actually, the Reverend Blackwood. He married my cousin some 20 years ago." Eliza blinked. I did not know." "Why would you? It was a minor connection, of no consequence." But Lady Salisbury's expression had softened slightly. "He was a good man, kind, unassuming. When I heard your name, I wondered if you might be his daughter." "I am, my lady." "Then I hope you have inherited his goodness, Miss Blackwood." Lady Salisbury's gaze flicked to Sebastian, then back. "The Duke is not an easy man. He requires someone with patience and warmth. I hope you can provide both." "I shall certainly try, my lady." "Then welcome to society." Lady Salisbury offered a thin smile. "Do not let the vultures devour you. They always go for the eyes first." She swept away, leaving Eliza breathless. But the exchange had been observed, Lady Salisbury, speaking with the Duke's intended, not cutting her dead. Word would spread. Opinions would shift. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and observations. Eliza met earls and countesses, viscounts and baronesses, an endless parade of titles and faces. Some were kind, most were merely curious. A few were openly hostile friends of the dowager, no doubt. But Sebastian never left her side. He steered her through conversations with practiced ease, deflecting intrusive questions, redirecting attention when she faltered. He laughed at her jokes, deferred to her opinions, looked at her as though she were precious beyond measure. It was an act. She knew it was an act, the performance he had promised. But it did not feel like an act. It felt like something she might actually be able to believe. They danced the first waltz together. His hand was warm at her waist, his grey eyes holding hers, and for 3 minutes Eliza forgot about society and rumours, and everything except the man before her. "You are doing beautifully," he murmured as they turned. "I am terrified." "It does not show." He pulled her slightly closer. You are magnificent, Eliza. Every eye in this room is on you,
and they are all wondering how a country vicar's daughter managed to capture the uncapturable Duke of Hartington. How did I manage it? By being exactly who you are. He smiled down at her. By sitting in the grass in a borrowed dress and telling my sister she was worthy of love. By having the courage to say yes to a madman's proposal. By being warm and kind and honest in a world full of cold calculation. You make me sound far nobler than I am. I make you sound exactly as you are. His hand tightened on hers. I meant what I said that night, Eliza. You are remarkable, and I am fortunate beyond measure that you agreed to this madness. The music swelled and faded. They spun to a stop, breathing hard, still holding each other. And then Sebastian did something that changed everything. He leaned down and kissed her. Not a polite kiss. Not a brush of lips for show, a real kiss, deep and claiming, his hand cupping the back of her head, his mouth moving against hers with an intensity that left no room for doubt. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Sebastian pulled back, his eyes dark with something that looked like hunger. I apologize, he said quietly. That was not part of the plan. Eliza could not speak. Her lips tingled, her heart raced, her entire body felt alive with sensation. I am not sorry, she managed finally. His smile was slow and devastating. Neither am I. Everything changed after that night. The kiss at Lady Salisbury's ball became the talk of the ton. Some whispered that it was scandalous, improper, evidence of the Duke's besottedness. Others declared it romantic proof that this unlikely match was genuine after all. The Dowager's campaign faltered. It was one thing to claim that Miss Blackwood had trapped the Duke through stratagem. It was quite another to explain a kiss like that. A man did not kiss a woman he had been manipulated into marrying, not with such obvious passion, not in front of 500 witnesses. And between Sebastian and Eliza, something shifted. They still called their arrangement practical. They still spoke of convenience and partnership and separate lives. But the careful distance they had maintained began to close. Sebastian sought her company at meals, in the library, on walks through the gardens. He touched her more often, a hand at her elbow, fingers brushing hers, once a kiss pressed to her palm that made her shiver. This was not supposed to happen, he told her one evening, standing with her on the terrace as the sun set over the gardens. I was not supposed to feel this way. What way? He turned to face her. Like I cannot imagine my life without you. Like every moment apart from you is a moment wasted. Like I have been walking through a fog for 9 years, and you are the first clear light I have seen. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. Sebastian, I know. He reached for her hand. I know this is not what we agreed. I know I promised you a marriage of convenience, a partnership without expectations. But I find I can no longer keep that promise. I find I want... He stopped, shaking his head. I want everything, Eliza. I want mornings waking beside you and evenings talking with you. I want children and laughter and a lifetime of knowing you. I want... She kissed him. It was clumsy, unpracticed. She had never kissed anyone before the ball, but it was real. She poured everything she felt into that kiss, hope and fear, and the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of falling in love. When they broke apart, Sebastian was smiling. I take it that means you share my sentiments? I have spent my entire life not wanting things, Eliza said, her voice unsteady. I convinced myself that contentment was enough, that safety was all I needed. But you... She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. You make me want everything too, and it terrifies me. Why? Because I have nothing to offer you. No fortune, no connections, no skills beyond kindness and stubborn hope.
What if that is not enough? What if you wake one day and realize you married a nobody, just as your stepmother said? Then I will remind myself what that nobody has given me. He covered her hand with his.
Peace, laughter, a sister who finally believes she is loved, a home that is no longer a battlefield. Eliza, you have transformed my life in a few short weeks. If that is not enough, then nothing ever will be. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. I do not know how to be a duchess. You will learn. I do not know how to navigate society. You are already navigating it better than you think. I do not know. She broke off, struggling to articulate the fear that lurked beneath all the others. I do not know how to stop being afraid that this will all be taken away, that I will wake up and find myself back in that grey dress, invisible again, with nothing but memories of what I almost had. Sebastian pulled her into his arms and held her close. I cannot promise that nothing will ever hurt you, he said against her hair. I cannot promise that life will be easy or that society will ever fully accept you, but I can promise this. I will never let you be invisible again. I will never let you doubt your worth. I will spend every day of our lives reminding you that you are seen, that you are known, that you are loved. Loved? He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Yes, loved. I love you, Eliza Blackwood. I did not expect to, and I certainly did not plan to, but there it is. I love you. She should have been frightened. She should have retreated behind her careful walls, reminded herself that love was a risk she could not afford to take. Instead, she smiled. I love you too. His answering smile was radiant. Then marry me. Properly, I mean. Not a convenient arrangement, a real marriage. A love match. We are already engaged. Then let me propose again. He dropped to one knee, right there on the terrace, and took her hand. Eliza Blackwood, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not for convenience, not for position, but because I love you, and cannot imagine my life without you. She laughed, actually laughed, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. Yes, yes, I will marry you. I will marry you properly and truly, and with my whole heart. He rose and kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This time they kissed like two people who had finally found each other after a very long search. But happiness, Eliza was learning, could not last uninterrupted. 2 days later, the Dowager requested a private audience. Eliza went, despite Sebastian's objections. She had spent weeks avoiding direct confrontation, letting Sebastian fight her battles. But if she was to be Duchess of Hartington, she would have to face her adversary eventually. The Dowager received her in the blue sitting room, the finest in the house, decorated with priceless art and silk wallpaper. She sat in a gilded chair like a queen on her throne, her face composed in icy disdain. "Miss Blackwood, do sit down." Eliza sat, folding her hands in her lap. "You wish to see me, Your Grace?" "I wish to offer you a warning." The Dowager's voice was pleasant, almost gentle. "You have won this round. I acknowledge that. Sebastian is besotted with you. The Ton is charmed by your humble origins. Even my daughter has been seduced by your pretense of kindness." "It is not a pretense, is it not?" The Dowager smiled thinly. "We shall see. But that is not why I asked to see you. I asked to see you because I want you to understand something about your position." "My position?" "You have no family, Miss Blackwood, no connections. Your mother is ill, your father dead. Your references impeccable but ultimately irrelevant." The Dowager leaned forward. "You are entirely dependent on Sebastian's goodwill. If he tires of you, if he realizes what a mistake he has made, you will have nothing. Sebastian will not tire of me.
All men tire of their wives eventually. The question is only what happens when they do. The dowager's smile sharpened. I am offering you an alternative. Leave now, quietly, before the wedding. I will ensure you are compensated enough to support yourself and your mother in comfort for the rest of your lives. You will never want for anything. Eliza stared at her. You are trying to bribe me. I am trying to spare you pain. The dowager's voice hardened. You do not belong in this world, Miss Blackwood. You never will. No matter how many balls you attend or how many gowns you wear, you will always be the vicar's daughter playing dress-up. Society will never truly accept you. Sebastian will eventually see you for what you are. And what is that? Nobody. The dowager stood, her silk skirts rustling. A nobody who got lucky. A nobody who happened to be in the right place at the right time. A nobody who seduced a lonely man with a few kind words to his sister. Eliza rose as well. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. You are right about one thing, Your Grace. I am a nobody. I have no fortune, no connections, nothing to recommend me but my character. She stepped closer, and something flickered in the dowager's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the first hint of unease. But that is precisely why Sebastian chose me. Because I am not calculating or manipulative or consumed by ambition, because I love his sister truly, and I love him truly, and I have nothing to gain from either. Love. The dowager's laugh was brittle. You think love matters in this world? I think it is the only thing that matters. Eliza met the older woman's eyes without flinching. You married a duke, Your Grace. You gained wealth and position and power, and yet you are bitter and angry and alone. What good has all your scheming done you? How dare you? I dare because I have nothing to lose. Eliza smiled, and it was not a kind smile. I walked into this house with nothing but the clothes on my back and a borrowed ring. The worst you can do is send me back to where I started. But you have so much more to lose. A son who despises you. A daughter who has finally found love and support elsewhere. A household full of servants who see through your cruelty. The dowager's face was white with fury. You will regret this. Perhaps. But I will regret it as Sebastian's wife, in Sebastian's home, surrounded by people who have chosen to love me. Eliza curtsied, shallow and mocking. I thank you for your concern, Your Grace, but I believe this conversation is concluded. She turned and walked out, her heart racing, her hands trembling. She had made an enemy. She had declared war, and she had never felt more alive. The dowager struck back 3 days later. Eliza was dressing for dinner when Annie burst into the room, white-faced and breathless. Miss the Dowager, she's called everyone into the drawing room. She says she has something to announce, something about your father. Eliza's blood ran cold. She hurried down the stairs, still fastening her earrings, and arrived to find the household assembled: Sebastian, Honoria, the upper servants, even Mrs. Phelps. The dowager stood before the fireplace, a sheaf of papers in her hand, triumph written on every line of her face. Ah, Miss Blackwood, how good of you to join us. She smiled, all teeth. I have made an interesting discovery. It seems your father, the saintly Reverend Blackwood, was not quite the man you have led us to believe. Mother, Sebastian said sharply, whatever you think you have found, I have found the truth. The dowager held up the papers. Letters. From a woman named Miss Catherine Ellsworth, written to your father 30 years ago. It seems the good Reverend was engaged to Miss Ellsworth before he married your mother, and he broke that engagement in the most scandalous fashion imaginable. Eliza felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. That is impossible. Is it? The letters are quite clear. Your father promised to marry Miss Ellsworth,
took certain liberties with her person, and then abandoned her when a more advantageous match presented itself. Miss Ellsworth's family was ruined. She died in disgrace a year later. The dowager's smile widened. It seems your father was not a saint after all. He was a seducer, a liar, and a cad. You are lying. But even as she said it, Eliza felt doubt creeping in. She did not know her father's history before his marriage. He had never spoken of it. I am not lying. These letters are genuine. I have had them verified. And tomorrow they will be published in every scandal sheet in London. The dowager's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Your father's disgrace will become your disgrace, Miss Blackwood. No one will believe that the daughter of such a man is anything but a fortune hunter herself. Enough. Sebastian stepped forward, his face thunderous. I don't care what those letters say. Eliza is not her father, and even if she were, even if every word of this were true, it would not change my intentions. You would marry the daughter of a seducer, a woman whose own blood is tainted with dishonor. I would marry Eliza. He took Eliza's hand. I have told you this before. I will not tell you again. But the dowager was not finished. She turned to Eliza, her smile softening into something almost pitying. I am giving you one last chance, Miss Blackwood. Leave tonight, quietly, and these letters will disappear. Your father's memory will remain unsullied. Your mother need never know. All you have to do is walk away. Eliza's hand tightened on Sebastian's. She thought of her father, kind, gentle, devoted to his parish. She thought of her mother, ill and fragile, believing her husband had been perfect. She thought of everything she had to lose. And then she thought of everything she had already gained. Sebastian's love, Honoria's devotion, a home, a family, a future she had never dared to imagine. She met the dowager's eyes. No. 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 Eliza released Sebastian's hand and stepped forward. Publish your letters. Tell your lies. I do not know if what you say about my father is true. Perhaps it is. Perhaps he made mistakes before I was born. But I know who he was when I knew him. A good man, a loving father, a faithful husband. Whatever sins he may have committed in his youth, he spent the rest of his life atoning for them. Pretty words, but they will not save you from scandal. Perhaps not. Eliza lifted her chin. But scandal cannot touch what Sebastian and I have built. Let society whisper. Let the ton gossip. I will not abandon the man I love because you threaten me with my father's past. She turned to Sebastian, and in his eyes she saw everything love, admiration, fierce protective pride. I am sorry, she whispered. This is not what you bargained for. You are exactly what I bargained for. He drew her close and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Whatever comes, we face it together. The dowager watched them for a long moment. Then, slowly, something in her face crumbled not into defeat, but into something harder to name. Grief, perhaps, or envy. Very well, she said quietly. You have made your choice. She gathered her papers and swept from the room. Behind her, Eliza sagged against Sebastian's chest, trembling with delayed shock. It's all right, he murmured against her hair. It's all right. I've got you. But even as he held her, Eliza knew that it was not all right. The dowager had one final card to play, and she had just laid it on the table. The battle was not over. It had only just begun. The scandal broke like a summer storm. Within 48 hours of the dowager's confrontation, the letters appeared in every gossip sheet and scandal rag in London. The story spread through drawing rooms and coffee houses, repeated and embellished with each telling. The Reverend Blackwood seducer, betrayer, ruiner of innocent women. His daughter surely cut from the same cloth,
surely pursuing the Duke of Hartington with the same calculated cunning that had destroyed poor Miss Catherine Ellsworth 30 years before. Eliza sat in her rooms at Hartington Hall and read the papers Annie brought her, each word a fresh wound. "You shouldn't look at those, miss." Annie hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "They're nothing but lies and spite." "Some of it may be true." Eliza set down the latest sheet, her hands steady despite the turmoil within. "I have written to my mother, asking her what she knows of my father's life before their marriage. Until I hear from her, I cannot say what is true and what is fabrication. Does it matter? The Duke loves you. He said so himself. It matters to me." Eliza rose and moved to the window, looking out over the gardens that had become so dear to her. "I have spent my life believing my father was a good man. If he was not, if he truly did what the Dowager claims, I need to know. Not for society's sake, but for my own." The door opened, and Sebastian entered without knocking. His face was drawn, his cravat askew, signs of the battle he had been fighting on her behalf. "The invitations are being withdrawn," he said without preamble. "Lady Salisbury sent regrets this morning, claiming a sudden illness. The Countess of Sefton has remembered a previous engagement. Even Lady Jersey—" He broke off, shaking his head. "They are all running scared. The Dowager has done her work well." "I expected as much." "You should not have to expect it." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "This is my fault. I should have anticipated her attack, should have prepared. How could you have known?" Eliza squeezed his fingers. "She has been planning this for weeks, gathering her evidence, waiting for the perfect moment. We were so consumed with our own happiness that we forgot she was watching. I will fix this. I will find a way to prove the letters are forgeries. And if they are not?" Eliza met his eyes steadily. "Sebastian, we must face the possibility that my father was not the man I believed him to be. If these accusations are true, no amount of denial will change them. Then we will weather the scandal together. I told you. I know what you told me, but I need you to understand something." She released his hands and stepped back, putting distance between them. "If this destroys your standing in society, if it taints your name and your family's honor, I will not be the cause of your ruin. I love you too much for that." Sebastian's expression darkened. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that if the cost of being with me is too high, I will release you from our engagement. I will leave quietly, as the Dowager suggested, and you can tell the world that you discovered the truth and acted honorably by ending things." "No. Sebastian. No." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and gripped her shoulders. "I will not hear this. I will not let you sacrifice yourself on the altar of my reputation. Do you think I care what society says? Do you think their approval means anything compared to you? Your reputation is not just about approval. It is about power, influence, the ability to protect those you love." Eliza's voice cracked. "How can you protect Honoria if you are tainted by association with me? How can you fulfill your duties as Duke if every door is closed against you?" "I will find new doors. I will build new alliances. I will—" He stopped, his grip softening, his grey eyes searching her face. "Eliza, do you trust me? With my life? Then trust me in this. Trust that I know my own mind, my own heart. Trust that I have counted the cost and found it worth paying." He cupped her face in his hands. "I chose you. I will keep choosing you, every day, regardless of what the world says. That is what love means. That is what marriage means. I will not let you go." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks. "I am so afraid." "I know. So am I." He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, the salt tracks on her cheeks.
But we will be afraid together, and together we will find a way through. She let herself lean into him, let herself be held, let herself believe just for a moment that love might be stronger than scandal. Then Annie burst through the door, breathless. "Miss, your Grace, there's a carriage coming up the drive. It's—" She gulped for air. "It's Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Eliza's mother." Eliza pulled back from Sebastian's embrace, her heart stuttering with sudden fear. Her mother was here. Her mother, who was too ill to travel, who had not left London in 3 years, who should be resting in her cramped lodging-house rather than jolting along country roads. "Something is wrong," Eliza said. "Something must be terribly wrong." She gathered her skirts and ran. Mrs. Blackwood looked like a ghost. She sat in the entrance hall, having refused to go further into the house, her face grey with exhaustion and something else, something fierce and determined that Eliza recognized from her own mirror. "Mamma!" Eliza fell to her knees beside her mother's chair. "What are you doing here? You should not have travelled your health—" "My health be damned." Mrs. Blackwood's voice was thin but steady. "I received your letter, and then I received these." She held up a sheaf of papers. The scandal sheets, Eliza realized. The same ones that had been delivered to Hartington Hall. "I came as soon as I could arrange transport." "There are things you need to know, Eliza. Things I should have told you years ago." Sebastian stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackwood, you are welcome in my home. Please, let us make you comfortable." "No." The older woman's eyes fixed on him with surprising sharpness. "Not yet. This cannot wait. I have kept this secret for 30 years, and it has caused enough damage already." "What secret?" Eliza's voice emerged as a whisper. "Mamma, what do you know about these letters?" Mrs. Blackwood was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with old grief. "The letters are real. Your father was engaged to Catherine Ellsworth before he met me. He did break that engagement, and he did contribute to her ruin." She held up a hand as Eliza began to protest, but the scandal sheets tell only half the story. The half that serves the dowager's purpose. The true story is more complicated and far more tragic. "Tell me." Mrs. Blackwood drew a shaky breath. "Your father was 22 when he became engaged to Catherine. He was young, idealistic, newly ordained. She was beautiful and charming, and everything a young clergyman could want. He loved her desperately. Then why did he break the engagement? Because he discovered she was already married." The words fell like stones into still water. Eliza stared at her mother, uncomprehending. Catherine Ellsworth was not what she seemed. She had married secretly at 17, a fortune hunter who abandoned her within a year. When she met your father, she was living under her maiden name, pretending to be unwed, hoping to find a man foolish enough to marry her anyway. But the letters, they say, father ruined her. He refused to continue the engagement once he learned the truth. Catherine was desperate. She threatened to claim he had compromised her, to ruin his reputation as thoroughly as he had ruined her hopes. Your father chose to bear the scandal rather than commit bigamy. Mrs. Blackwood's voice hardened. He never defended himself publicly because doing so would have meant exposing Catherine's first husband, a man with powerful connections, who had made it clear that any revelation would result in violence. So father let himself be painted as a villain to protect others? That was always his way. A ghost of a smile crossed Mrs. Blackwood's face. He met me a year later, when the scandal had died down, and he had accepted a small parish where no one knew his history. I knew everything he told me before he proposed, and I loved him anyway. Perhaps I loved him more for it. Eliza's mind raced, trying to reconcile this story with the accusations in the scandal sheets. But the dowager, how could she have obtained letters that tell such a different story? Because the letters are Catherine's,
written to your father during their engagement." Mrs. Blackwood pulled a small packet from her reticule. "I have them, the real letters, not excerpts selected to support a lie. Catherine wrote to your father constantly, professing love, making promises. But she also wrote letters after the break, letters begging him to reconsider, admitting her deception, threatening him when pleading failed. The Dowager must have obtained only the earlier letters, or perhaps she edited them to remove any reference to Catherine's duplicity. You have proof." Sebastian stepped forward, his voice sharp with hope. "You can prove that the scandal sheets are lying. I can prove they are telling less than the truth." Mrs. Blackwood handed the packet to Eliza. "These are Catherine's final letters to your father, the ones where she admits everything. I kept them all these years, never imagining they would be needed. But when I read what the papers were saying—" Her voice broke. "I could not let my husband's memory be destroyed by half-truths. I could not let my daughter suffer for sins her father never committed." Eliza opened the packet with trembling fingers. The letters were old, the paper yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were clear. Catherine Ellsworth, confessing her deception. Catherine Ellsworth, admitting her secret marriage. Catherine Ellsworth, begging the Reverend Blackwood to forgive her and marry her anyway, promising that no one would ever know. "This changes everything," Eliza breathed. "It proves your father was a victim, not a villain." Mrs. Blackwood reached out and took her daughter's hand. "He was young and foolish, yes. He loved unwisely, but he acted with honor when the truth came out, and he spent the rest of his life trying to be worthy of the grace he had been given." Eliza looked up at Sebastian and saw her own emotions mirrored in his face: relief, vindication, and a fierce determination. "We need to make this public," he said. "We need to publish these letters, expose the Dowager's manipulation." "No." Mrs. Blackwood's voice was firm. "Not the letters. Catherine Ellsworth's family still lives. Her first husband's descendants still hold positions of importance. If we expose the truth, we drag innocent people into a scandal that is not of their making." "Then how?" "We tell the truth without naming names." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes met Sebastian's. "We say that the Reverend Blackwood broke his engagement because he discovered his intended was deceiving him about material facts. We say that he chose to bear false accusations rather than destroy another's reputation. We say that he was a man of honor and that his daughter has inherited his integrity. Will anyone believe it? They will believe it if the right people vouch for it." Mrs. Blackwood smiled thinly. "I may be an invalid, Your Grace, but I am not without connections. Before I married the Reverend Blackwood, I was Miss Sarah Pemberton, daughter of Sir William Pemberton of Hampshire." Eliza's breath caught. "Mamma, you never said—" "There was nothing to say. My father disowned me when I married a disgraced clergyman, but my brother inherited the baronetcy, and he, unlike our father, never blamed me for following my heart." Mrs. Blackwood's smile softened. "I wrote to him before I left London. He is prepared to vouch for your father's character and mine. His word carries weight in society." Sebastian looked at Eliza's mother with new respect. "You have been planning this." "I have been protecting my family." Mrs. Blackwood's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "The Dowager thought she was attacking a woman without connections. She was wrong. The counterattack took 3 days to organize. Sir William Pemberton, Eliza's uncle, a man she had never met, arrived at Hartington Hall with his wife and 3 grown sons. He was a bluff, hearty man in his 60s, with a soldier's bearing and a politician's tongue. "So this is my niece," he said, clasping Eliza's hands. "My sister's daughter. You have her eyes, you know, the same stubborn set to your chin." "Sir William." Eliza felt overwhelmed by his presence, by the sudden expansion of her family. "I did not know Mamma never spoke of you." "No, she wouldn't have. My father's cruelty wounded her deeply,
and she was too proud to seek reconciliation while he lived. Sir William's expression softened. But I never forgot her. I never stopped hoping she might reach out. When her letter arrived, he shook his head. I came as quickly as I could. The next days were a whirlwind of activity. Sir William called upon his connections, spreading the word that the scandal sheets had told a distorted version of events. His sons circulated through clubs and coffee houses, dropping hints about the dowager's vendetta against her stepson's chosen bride. Lady Pemberton, a formidable woman in her own right, paid calls on the most influential hostesses in London, vouching for Eliza's character and her mother's noble birth. Sebastian, meanwhile, confronted the publishers of the scandal sheets. He did not threaten lawsuits or demand retractions. He simply made clear that anyone who continued to slander his future Duchess would find themselves unable to secure credit, patronage, or favourable treatment from any business associated with the Hartington name. The tide began to turn. Lady Salisbury, who had withdrawn her invitation to dinner, suddenly remembered that her illness had passed. The Countess of Sefton recalled that her prior engagement had been cancelled. Lady Jersey herself called at Hartington Hall to offer her support, and not incidentally to gather gossip about the dowager's scheming. She overreached, Lady Jersey declared, sipping tea in the blue drawing-room. Everyone knows she has been trying to control the Duke for years. This attack on Miss Blackwood, the future Duchess, smacks of desperation, and society does so despise desperation. Through it all, the dowager remained sequestered in her rooms. She emerged only for meals, her face set in rigid lines, speaking to no one. Eliza almost felt sorry for her, but not quite. She did this to herself, Sebastian said, when Eliza expressed a flicker of compassion. She had every opportunity to accept you, to make peace with my choice. Instead, she chose war. She cannot complain now that she is losing. What will happen to her? That depends on her. Sebastian's voice was grim. If she accepts defeat gracefully, she may remain at Hartington Hall as my stepmother, with all the respect due her position. If she continues to scheme— He shook his head. I will not have my wife tormented in her own home. If the dowager cannot live peacefully under this roof, she will live elsewhere. And Honoria? Honoria stays with us. His expression softened. She is your sister now, in every way that matters. I will not allow her mother to poison her against you. Eliza thought of the girl who had become so dear to her, awkward, bookish, desperate for love. I would not allow it either. The confrontation came on a grey afternoon, 1 week before the wedding. Eliza was in the library, reviewing the final arrangements with Mrs. Phelps, who had thawed considerably since the Pemberton family's arrival, when the dowager swept through the door. "Leave us," she commanded the housekeeper. Mrs. Phelps looked at Eliza, who nodded slightly. The housekeeper withdrew, closing the door behind her. The two women faced each other across the length of the room. The dowager looked older than she had a month ago, the lines around her mouth deeper, her posture somehow less commanding. "You have won," she said flatly. "I trust you are satisfied." "I have never sought to defeat you, Your Grace." Eliza kept her voice steady. "I sought only to marry the man I love and build a life with him." "You are the one who declared war, because you do not belong here." The dowager's voice cracked with something that might have been grief. "You do not understand what it means to be a duchess, what sacrifices it requires, what burdens it imposes. You think you can waltz in from your vicarage and your rented rooms and simply— I think I can learn." Eliza stepped forward. "I have learned everything else I needed to survive. I learned to be a companion when my father died and left us nothing. I learned to be invisible when visibility meant vulnerability. I learned to want nothing, expect nothing, hope for nothing, because hope was a luxury I could not afford." She stopped a few feet from the dowager. And now I am learning to hope again. Sebastian taught me that. Honoria taught me that. Even you, in your cruelty, taught me that because you showed me exactly what I did not want to become. The dowager's face contorted. You think you are so different from me? You think love will protect you from becoming bitter and cold? I loved once. I loved Honoria's father with everything I had, and he died and left me with nothing but a title and a stepdaughter who resented me, and a daughter who was never good enough. Honoria is perfect exactly as she is. Honoria is plain and awkward, and will never make the match she deserves. The dowager's voice broke. I wanted so much for her. I wanted her to have everything I never had: beauty, grace, the kind of charm that opens doors. Instead, she hides in libraries and quotes poetry and looks at me with your father's eyes. She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth as though she could take back the words. Eliza felt the world tilt. My father's eyes? What do you mean? The dowager was silent. What do you mean? Eliza's voice sharpened. Honoria is the Duke's daughter, the old Duke. She has his eyes grey, like Sebastian's. She has her father's eyes. The dowager's voice was barely a whisper. But the old Duke was not her father. The library seemed to contract around them. Eliza stared at the woman before her, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. I do not understand. Of course you do not. How could you? The dowager laughed bitterly. I was young when I married the Duke, young and beautiful and desperate to escape a home where I was worth nothing but my face and my dowry. The Duke was kind, but he was old, and he was still in love with his first wife. He never truly saw me. He never truly wanted me. So I found someone who did. The dowager's voice hardened. A man who made me feel seen, valued, desired. It was foolish. I knew it was foolish even as it was happening. But I was so lonely. So desperately, achingly lonely. And Honoria is the product of that foolishness. The dowager's eyes were dry, her face a mask. The Duke never knew. He accepted her as his own, loved her as his own, died believing she was his child. I have kept the secret for 12 years. Eliza's mind raced through the implications. If this were true, if Honoria were not the old Duke's daughter, then she had no claim to the Hartington name, no right to the privileges she had been raised with. Who was the father? The dowager shook her head. It does not matter. He is dead now. He died in the same fever that took your father, if you can believe such irony. Does Honoria know? No, and she must never know. The dowager's composure cracked, real fear showing through. That is why I fought so hard against you, Miss Blackwood. You truly see her in ways I never could. I was terrified that you would see this too, that you would somehow divine the truth and use it against her. I would never. I know that now. The dowager's voice was weary. I have watched you with her these past weeks. You love her. Genuinely love her. Not for what she can give you, but for who she is. It is more than I have ever been able to give her. Eliza was silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what she had learned. Then, slowly, she spoke. I am going to tell you something, Your Grace, and I need you to hear it. The dowager met her eyes. Honoria is Sebastian's sister. She has been his sister since the day she was born, and nothing can change that. Blood does not make family, love does. Sebastian loves her. I love her. And we will protect her, always, regardless of who her biological father may have been. You would keep my secret. I would keep Honoria's secret. Eliza's voice was firm. She does not need to know. She has already spent 12 years believing she was a disappointment to you. Learning that she is not even the Duke's true daughter would destroy her. Then you understand why I understand nothing of the kind. Eliza cut her off. Your fear for Honoria does not excuse the cruelty you have shown her all these years. You pushed her away, criticized her, made her feel worthless, not because you did not love her, but because you were afraid your love would reveal the truth. That is not protection. That is cowardice. The Dowager flinched. But it is not too late. Eliza softened her voice. Honoria is still young. She still loves you, despite everything. You could rebuild what you have broken, if you are willing to try. How? How can I possibly? Start by seeing her. Not the daughter you wished for, but the daughter you have. She is brilliant and kind and loyal. She deserves a mother who appreciates those qualities instead of mourning the ones she lacks. The Dowager was silent. Then, very quietly, You are asking me to be a different person than I have ever been. I am asking you to be the person you might have been if fear had not twisted you. Eliza held out her hand. I am not your enemy, Your Grace. I never was. Can we not find a way to be at peace? The Dowager looked at Eliza's outstretched hand for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, pride warring with exhaustion, bitterness fighting with the desperate need for connection. Slowly, hesitantly, she took Eliza's hand. I do not know how to do this, she whispered. I do not know how to stop being afraid. Neither do I. Eliza squeezed her fingers. But I am learning. Perhaps we can learn together. The wedding took place on a golden September morning. The chapel at Hartington Hall was filled with flowers, roses from the garden where Eliza had first met Honoria, hothouse blooms from the estates of Sir William Pemberton, wildflowers gathered by the servants who had come to love their new mistress. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting jeweled shadows on the ancient stones. Eliza walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm, wearing a gown of ivory silk that had been her mother's 30 years before, carefully preserved, lovingly altered, a bridge between past and present. Her mother sat in the front pew, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped with the Dowager's. It had taken weeks, but something had shifted between the two older women. They were not friends, perhaps they never would be, but they had found a kind of understanding. They had both loved difficult men, both sacrificed for their children, both learned that pride was a poor substitute for connection. Honoria stood at the altar as Eliza's attendant, her face glowing with joy. She wore pink for the first time in her life, a soft rose that brought colour to her cheeks and light to her grey eyes. You look beautiful, Eliza had told her that morning. I look like myself, Honoria had replied, and smiled. Sebastian waited at the altar, his dark hair touched by sunlight, his grey eyes fixed on Eliza as she approached. He wore his father's ring on his finger. She had returned it to him the night before, saying that it belonged on the hand that had given it. You will wear it today, she had said, and every day after, a reminder of what your father taught you about love. Now, as she reached him and placed her hand in his, she saw that ring gleaming in the candlelight. He lifted her fingers to his lips, exactly as he had done at the garden party, what felt like a lifetime ago. You came back, he murmured, too soft for anyone else to hear. I never left. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. They spoke vows that had been spoken for centuries, promised things that could not truly be promised, love, honour, faithfulness, until death. But Eliza meant every word, and she knew Sebastian did too. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian kissed her with the same intensity he had shown at Lady Salisbury's ball, a claiming, a declaration, a promise. The congregation erupted in applause, and Eliza felt something shift in her chest.
She was no longer Miss Eliza Blackwood, Vicar's daughter, companion, nobody. She was the Duchess of Hartington. She was Sebastian's wife. She was home. The wedding breakfast was a blur of toasts and congratulations, of unfamiliar faces and warm wishes. Lady Jersey declared the match the most romantic of the decade. Sir William Pemberton boasted about his niece's accomplishments until his wife elbowed him into silence. Even Mrs. Phelps, the formerly glacial housekeeper, was seen wiping her eyes when she thought no one was watching. But the moment Eliza would remember, the moment she would treasure for the rest of her life, came later, when the guests had departed and the family gathered in the library. Sebastian stood by the fire, one arm around Honoria's shoulders. Mrs. Blackwood sat in a comfortable chair, wrapped in blankets, looking healthier than she had in years. The dowager hovered nearby, uncertain of her place, but present. "I have something for you," Sebastian said, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He drew out a small velvet box and handed it to Eliza. She opened it to find a ring, not the signet ring she knew so well, but something new. A band of gold set with a single pearl, simple and elegant. "It was my mother's," Sebastian said quietly. "My real mother, I mean, the first Duchess. My father gave it to her on their wedding day, and she wore it until the day she died. I have kept it all these years, waiting." He paused, his voice rough. "Waiting for someone worthy of it." Eliza slipped the ring onto her finger, next to the gold band Sebastian had placed there during the ceremony. It fit perfectly. "There is something else." Sebastian reached into his pocket again. "For you, Honoria." Honoria's eyes widened as he produced a second box, a smaller one, holding a delicate bracelet set with tiny pearls. "This was my mother's too. Father gave it to her when she was carrying me, to celebrate the child they would have together." Sebastian's voice was steady, but Eliza saw the emotion beneath. "I want you to have it, not because you are related to her by blood, but because you are my sister, and I love you, and she would have loved you too." Honoria burst into tears and threw her arms around Sebastian's neck. He held her tight, his eyes meeting Eliza's over her head, and in his gaze she saw everything they had built together, hope and healing, family and love. "Thank you," Honoria whispered. "Thank you for choosing her. Thank you for making us a family." "We were always a family," Sebastian replied. "We simply needed someone to show us how." The dowager stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "I also have something, if you will accept it." She held out a small portrait in a gilded frame. It showed a young girl with grey eyes and fair hair, painted with obvious skill. "This is Honoria," the dowager said, "as she was at 5 years old, before I made so many mistakes." Her voice cracked. "I commissioned it because I wanted to remember her that way, small and hopeful, and looking at the world as though it were full of wonders." Honoria took the portrait with trembling hands. "Mamma, I know I have not been the mother you deserved." The dowager's composure finally broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know I have hurt you, criticized you, made you feel as though you were never enough. But you were always enough, Honoria. You were always more than enough. I was simply too frightened to see it." "Frightened? Of what?" The dowager glanced at Eliza, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Some secrets needed to be kept. Others needed to be reshaped into something survivable. "Frightened of losing you," the dowager said carefully. "Frightened that if I loved you too openly, something would take you away. So I held you at a distance, and I told myself it was for your own protection, and I—" She shook her head. "I was wrong. About so many things." Honoria set down the portrait, and slowly, hesitantly, moved to embrace her mother. The dowager stood rigid for a moment, and then her arms came up,
and she held her daughter close, and both of them wept. Mrs. Blackwood reached for Eliza's hand and squeezed it. "You did this," she murmured. "You brought them back together." They brought themselves. But Eliza smiled as she watched the Dowager and Honoria cling to each other. "I simply refused to let them stay apart." Sebastian moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers.
"My wife, the miracle worker. Your wife, the stubborn fool who does not know when to quit. That too." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I would not have you any other way." 8 years later, the rose garden was in full bloom. Eliza walked the familiar paths, her hand resting on her rounded belly, her eyes tracking the 3 children who raced between the hedges. Thomas, the eldest at 7, had his father's dark hair and his mother's warm eyes. He was serious and studious, already showing signs of the responsibility that would one day be his as heir to the dukedom. Elizabeth, 5 years old, and named for the woman her father had first seen sitting in the grass in a borrowed grey dress, was all laughter and mischief. And William, just 3, toddled after his siblings with the determined stubbornness that ran in the Blackwood blood.
"Careful," Eliza called as Thomas helped his sister climb onto a low stone wall. "Your aunt will have my head if any of you fall." "We won't fall, Mamma," Elizabeth shouted back. "We're very good at climbing. Aunt Honoria taught us." Honoria herself appeared around the corner of the hedge, her face flushed with exertion. At 20, she had grown into a handsome woman, not beautiful by society's narrow standards, but striking in her own way. She wore her hair simply, dressed in practical clothes, and moved through the world with a confidence that had been hard-won. "I'm teaching them to be resourceful," she said, coming to stand beside Eliza. "It's an important skill. So is arriving at dinner without grass stains on your clothes." "Overrated," Honoria grinned. "Besides, Sebastian doesn't care, and the Dowager—" She paused, her expression softening. "Well, the Dowager has learned not to comment." It had taken years for the Dowager to truly change years of small steps, setbacks, hard-won victories. She would never be warm or demonstrative. But she had learned to see her daughter, to appreciate her, to love her without the strangling grip of fear. They were not close exactly, but they were at peace. "How is your mother today?" Honoria asked. "Resting. The physicians say she is doing remarkably well, considering. They give her another year, perhaps 2. Eliza's voice was calm, but Honoria heard the grief beneath. "She wants to meet this one before—" She stopped, pressing her hand more firmly against her belly. "She will." Honoria slipped her arm through Eliza's. "She is the most stubborn woman I have ever met. She will not leave until she has held every one of your children." "Even you?" Honoria laughed. "Especially me. She says I am her 4th grandchild regardless of blood. I think she enjoys shocking people." They walked together through the garden, watching the children play. It was a perfect afternoon, golden sunlight, the scent of roses, the distant sounds of the household going about its business. Hartington Hall had become everything Eliza had once been afraid to dream of, a home filled with love, with laughter, with the kind of happiness she had spent years convincing herself was not for people like her. Sebastian found them by the fountain, where the children had abandoned climbing for the more appealing activity of splashing each other with water. "I've just had a letter from Sir William," he said, kissing Eliza's cheek and nodding to Honoria. "He's bringing the whole family for Christmas. He says he refuses to miss another opportunity to spoil his great nieces and nephews. He'll bankrupt himself buying them presents. He can afford it. Besides, he claims it's his duty as family patriarch." Sebastian's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I pointed out that I am also a patriarch, and he said I didn't count because I married into the family rather than being born to it." "Did you remind him that you're a duke?" "Several times." He was unmoved. Eliza laughed, and Sebastian pulled her close, his hand covering hers on her belly. "How are you feeling?" "Tired. Happy. Hungry." She leaned into him. "The usual." "Then we should go in. Cook has made your favorite tarts, and she'll be offended if you don't eat at least 3. They gathered the children, a process that involved considerable negotiation and the promise of sweets, and made their way back toward the house. Thomas walked ahead with his father, peppering him with questions about estate management. Elizabeth hung on Honoria's arm, chattering about the games they would play after dinner. William insisted on being carried, and Eliza lifted him despite her condition, pressing kisses to his chubby cheek. At the door, she paused and looked back at the garden. 8 years ago, she had stood in those rose beds with a crying girl, offering comfort she had not expected to give. 8 years ago, she had been nobody, a grey ghost on the edges of society, wanting nothing, expecting nothing, building walls against hope. Now she was a duchess, a wife, a mother. She had a family that stretched from the halls of Hartington to the drawing rooms of London. She had children who would grow up knowing they were loved, exactly as they were. She had a husband who still looked at her as though she were the only woman in the world, who still sought her counsel, and cherished her laughter, and kissed her in ballrooms without caring who watched. She had everything she had once been afraid to want. "Mamma?" William tugged at her hair. "What are you looking at?" "Nothing, darling." She smiled and turned back toward the house, toward her husband and her children, and the life she had built from nothing but kindness and stubborn hope. Nothing at all. But she was lying, just a little. She was looking at everything. She was seeing it clearly. Perhaps for the first time the full measure of what she had been given and what she had become. She was looking at a life that had started with someone calling her nobody, and she was thinking that nobody had never felt so much like everything. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Sebastian found her in the library. She sat in her favorite chair by the fire, reading Wordsworth, the same volume she had carried in her battered travelling case all those years ago. The spine was even more cracked now, the pages worn thin from countless readings. But the words were unchanged. The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. "I remember when I first saw you with that book," Sebastian said, settling into the chair across from her. "You were so careful with it." "As though it were made of gold. It was the only thing of value I owned." Eliza closed the book and set it aside. "Everything else could be replaced. But this my father's favourite, the pages he touched, the words he loved." She shook her head. "I could not have borne losing it." "And now? You have a library of thousands of books. Surely this one volume matters less." "Now it matters more." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. "Because I understand what my father understood, that the things we love gain value from being loved. This book is not precious because it is rare or beautiful. It is precious because it carries my father's memory, and my mother's tears, and all the hours I spent reading it when I had nothing else." Sebastian raised her hand to his lips, the gesture that had become as familiar as breathing. "I love you," he said. "I know I say it often. I know it has become commonplace. But I need you to know that I mean it every time. I mean it more with every year that passes." "I know," Eliza smiled. "I love you too. More than Wordsworth. More than roses. More than anything I once thought I wanted." "More than security?" "More than security." "More than respectability?" "Far more than respectability." She laughed softly. "I never wanted respectability. I only thought I did, because wanting anything larger seemed impossible. And now? Now I want everything." She rose from her chair and crossed to him, settling onto his lap despite her unwieldy belly. I want to grow old with you. I want to watch our children become who they are meant to be. I want to fill this house with so much love that no one who enters ever feels invisible again." Sebastian wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "That sounds like rather a lot of work." "It does. Are you up for it? With you?" He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I am up for anything." They sat together in the firelight, the library silent around them, the great house peaceful in the darkness. Outside, the rose garden slept beneath a canopy of stars. Somewhere in the upper floors, their children dreamed of games and sweets and all the adventures that awaited them. And Eliza, the vicar's daughter, the companion, the nobody who had become a duchess, rested in her husband's arms and thought about the strange path that had led her here. It had started with a garden party and a crying girl and a man who saw her when no one else did. It had continued through scandal and heartbreak, through battles won and truces forged, through the slow, patient work of building something real from the ruins of what had been. It had brought her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love. She would not have changed a single step. "Sebastian?" she murmured, drowsy with warmth and contentment. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For the ring." She touched the pearl on her finger, her mother-in-law's ring, worn smooth by 8 years of constant wear. "For seeing me, for refusing to let me be invisible." "You were never invisible, Eliza." His voice was soft in the darkness. "You were simply waiting for someone who knew how to look." She smiled and closed her eyes, letting his heartbeat lull her toward sleep. She had been nobody once. She had believed that was all she would ever be. But someone had looked at her and seen everything, and that had made all the difference.